globe, there are major weather pattern changes going on, and these changes are going to directly affect our winter here in the US. Arctic blasts, blizzards, and even severe weather are all on the table. But the interesting part is where these things are going to happen. In this video, I'm going to tell you all about that and what you can expect in your own backyard. So you've probably heard about it by now, but El Nino is ramping up down here in the Pacific Ocean. This pretty much just means that the waters are getting much warmer than usual, and since this is such a big body of water, its temperature fluctuations have major impacts on the weather worldwide. For the past 3 winters, we've been in a La Nina, which is when those Pacific waters are actually colder than usual. So as we head into our first El Nino in quite a while, we're expecting some big changes. During a typical El Nino winter, we usually see an extended Pacific jet stream, and this brings a lot of storms into the south. We also tend to see the polar jet stream cut across the Great Lakes, allowing for much warmer than average air to build up underneath it in western Canada and through the northern US. At the same time, things get a lot wetter and somewhat colder down here in the south thanks to all the storminess. And in between all those areas, we usually end up a bit drier than normal, but things fluctuate a lot here. But here's the thing, what I just showed you was a typical El Nino, and what we're about to experience is anything but a typical El Nino. You see, here's where we are right now with sea surface temperatures in the Pacific, and here are all the specific places that we monitor when determining the intensity of an El Nino. You can see very clearly that we are warmer than average across the board, and you can also see here the long history of these waters being colder than average, but more recently things have actually kind of flatlined. And if the warming stopped here, we'd be looking at only a weak to moderate El Nino for this winter, which would make a big difference in the overall USA forecast. But is the warming going to stop here? Well, let's take a look at some forecast models. Here's the latest projection from the CFS model. As you can see, just a few weeks from now, we do expect these waters to start warming significantly once again. And by around October, we're probably going to be in at least a moderate to strong El Nino. So what exactly is the impact here in the US when there's a strong El Nino versus a weak El Nino in the winter? Well, as far as temperatures go, with a weak El Nino, we would expect to see much colder than average temperatures for a lot of the East Coast due to that polar jet making its way farther south. But with a stronger El Nino, things are completely flipped. We get colder in the west and somewhat warmer in the east. But even dialing it down this much does not tell the whole story. Sure, it looks like we're going to have a moderate to strong El Nino, and we're going to have a lot of historical data to back up what that actually means for us, but there is no historical data whatsoever for this next big part of the equation that we have to figure out. Right now, the Atlantic Ocean is hotter than it's ever been before, and not only will that have implications on this hurricane season, but these warm waters have the ability to feed all storms, even snowstorms, especially east of the Mississippi River. Most of our bigger storms rely on warm, moist air from either the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic to survive. And the warmer and more moist they are, the bigger the storms can potentially be. If we get into a situation this winter where we have abundant cold air and the sea surface temperatures are still this high, we're going to have a very active stretch of big-time snowstorms. But once again, we haven't really ever seen an El Nino winter where the Atlantic was so warm, so we have nothing to compare this against. Now, we're still quite a ways away from winter, and there's only so much you can predict at this point. But I do have a preliminary and very early winter outlook for you. First of all, in general, I think temperatures are going to follow a pattern consistent with the strong El Ninos of the past. It's going to be much warmer than usual in western Canada, and a lot of that warmth will dip down into the central US as well. In the south, due to the amplified storm track, things are more than likely going to be quite a bit colder than usual. And despite the record warm sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, I think a lot of those southern storms are going to travel parallel to the East Coast, and that's going to bring down much colder air on a more regular basis to the eastern states. And everyone else in between can pretty much expect mostly average or typical seasonal temperatures